speaker is His Excellency Rodolfo Nin Novoa, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Uruguay. You have the floor, Your Excellency.
Señor Presidente de la Asamblea General, Profesor Tijane Muhammad Bande, Señor Secretario General de Naciones Unidas, Antonio Guterres.
Secretary General, Mr. President, Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, representatives of regional and international organizations.
Son mis primeras palabras para extender.
I would like to start by expressing gratitude to Her Excellency Mary Fernanda Espinosa, President of the 73rd Session of the General Assembly, for the excellent way she conducted the leadership of this body. As the first Latin American woman from the Latin American and Caribbean region to be elected president, she represented Latin Americans and also women of the entire world. I would also like to congratulate the permanent representative of Nigeria to the United Nations, His Excellency Tijani Muhammad Bande, for his election as president of the 74th session. I would like to express our every wish for every success during his term, and you can count on the support and commitment of my delegation. Mr. President, before getting to the central topic of this discussion, I'd like to make share some thoughts to provide some context. We live in a world of great uncertainty, which is due to the clash of opposing forces that are trying to establish a new order, often without considering the serious consequences that their actions entail for global peace, peace that is longed for by so many people who want to live in freedom and security, seeing their basic needs met without worrying about their rights being violated or security undermined. It's just enough to take a brief look at our planet to understand how fragile is the foundation that sustains peaceful coexistence between states. The tension we see in Asia and the Middle East, the turmoil, political and economic in Europe, hunger and malnutrition in Africa, alarming expansion of extremist ideologies, all these are risk factors that only compound the fight for power that confronts that takes the form sometimes of trade wars or ideological wars and confronts the main powers that are trying to establish domination. We're deeply worried by the withdrawal of the United States from the Iranian nuclear treaty that was painstakingly achieved and that casts a shadow on the future of peace in this fragile region and could lead Iran to resume its nuclear program with unpredictable consequences for international peace and security. Uruguay is a firm defender of denuclearization, and we would urge the parties to reconsider their positions and act in a conscientious way, setting aside short-term discourses for political gain that could have very serious global consequences. By the same token, my country is very concerned about the proliferation of weapons, especially small arms and light weapons. Their unbridled access by individuals in countries with very lax legislation is responsible for a growing trend of people taking justice into their own hands. In Latin America, we're profoundly alarmed by the progress of extremist ideologies that are trying to apply by force their solutions to other countries, contravening shamelessly the institutional arrangements of regional organizations and creating crisis situations and violence as a pretext to impose their doctrines by the force of arms and pillage Latin American people. Even more, we're concerned that some governments of the region have embraced these same ideologies and procedures, and the use of such ideologies is still fresh in our memories, as well as their consequences. We cannot allow the principle of non-intervention to be a barrier for serious violations of human rights. Now, nor can we tolerate a foreign intervention under the pretext of defending democracy and a supposedly liberating invasion, which would only lead to the loss of thousands of lives, and as well as economic sanctions that plunge countries in poverty, as is currently the case in Venezuela. Only a dialogue and understanding among the parties will make it possible to reach a peaceful solution to the crisis. Now, likewise, we'd like to speak out in this assembly, just as we have done for the past 27 years, to strongly condemn the savage and illegal financial and trade blockade that has been imposed for the past 50 years against the Republic of Cuba. These sanctions are illegal, contrary to international law, and they have made the Cuban people poor and have put in question the future of the men and women of this brethren Latin American country. Uruguay has a long-standing tradition of defending multilateralism, democracy, self-determination, and protection and promotion of human rights. Today, we are here to further bolster our commitment to continue advocating for solutions based on dialogue, peace, democracy, and the need to uphold human rights, as well as regulating the conflicts that are emerging in the countries of the region. Uruguay recognizes the United Nations Security Council as the only body with the remit to implement measures against member states in order to maintain or reestablish international peace and security, or to decide on the use of force in line with Chapter 7 of the Charter. The word has moved towards building of this institutional architecture, which has its strengths and weaknesses, and it will always be defended and upheld by Uruguay. Uruguay believes in international law as a guarantor of peaceful coexistence between nations. This is why Uruguay has actively participated in the defense of peace and international security through the peacekeeping troops, to which it contributes significant contingents. Uruguay is the most important contributor to these operations from the Western Hemisphere. Uruguay, as a founding member of the United Nations, is deeply committed to multilateralism in all areas, not only as a form of protection against the more powerful actors, but also as a framework to comply with our own obligations that we have taken on. Mr. President, 4 years ago, the member states of the United Nations committed ourselves to the Sustainable Development Goals. Some of these goals have informed this general debate. And bearing this in mind, Uruguay has assumed its commitment to the 2030 agenda in a responsible way. Now, this agenda fully is in line with the policies that we've been implementing for the past 15 years, and we've incorporated the agenda into our national context down to the local level. We, in 2017, 2018, and 2019, my country has presented voluntary reports that reflect the major progress achieved on each one of the 17 goals. Mr. President, I would like to refer here in this before this assembly to three issues that are vectors that cut across all SDGs: the elimination of poverty, the fight against climate change, and achieving quality education. First of all, allow me to focus on the worst scourge of our world, the greatest threat to peace, the source of the greatest ills of our time, the enemy on which we should focus all our efforts, that is poverty. If we eliminate poverty, we can put an end to a lack of education and make education universal. If we eliminate poverty, we'll reduce damage to the environment. If we eliminate poverty, we'll eliminate hunger, exclusion, discrimination. If we do away with poverty, we will lastly be closer to the state of well-being that I referred to at the start of my statement, a global peace. The equitable distribution of wealth and the eradication of extreme poverty are priority for the Uruguay government. For 2030, we intend to eradicate once and for all forms of extreme poverty. We've been working for 15 years to achieve this goal, and it is with great satisfaction that we can say today that in Uruguay there's not a single child who sleeping on the streets. In 2005 was a milestone in our fight against poverty and extreme poverty in Uruguay. To respond to the needs of our people, important institutional innovations were launched, while other reforms were implemented and expanded in the area of social protection. This new institutional framework gave a leading role to social policies. Social spending was increased, and broad strategic planning in this area was conducted. All this in a context of uninterrupted economic growth over the past 16 years. Furthermore, our country has focused on decent work, ensuring guarantees and rights to workers, including the right to social security, free medical assistance for rural workers and those domestic workers. These are sectors that were historically left behind. These public policies have been essential to, and in fact, at the last General Assembly of the ILO, they've led to a complaint of the management sector, the employer sector, against the government, because it considers that we put too much stress on the rights of workers. In fact, as a result of these social policies, the total number of individuals below the poverty line has been reduced to 8%, while extreme poverty is 0.1%. Inequality is 0.38%, which means that Uruguay is the most equal country in Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, this agenda, for which Uruguay has been internationally recognized, has contributed to progress in building a free and democratic society. We are one of the few full democracies based on strong institutions with strong political parties. The oldest political parties are over 200 years old. This solid institutional framework has allowed Uruguay to not be affected by the wave of corruption that has affected the region. Mr. President, while global individual wealth has increased exponentially over the past 20 years, 736 million people live in extreme poverty in the world. Less than 10% of the global population owns 86% of the wealth, while 70% own some 2.7%. 96% of the poor live in a few countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Now, behind the momentum of the explosion of the digital technology, the growth of emerging economies, and the global economy following the financial crisis at the beginning of the year, following all this, the world has increased its wealth by 66%, starting from 1995. However, this growth in wealth has not managed to put an end to poverty or diminish this inequality. Quite to the contrary, this has increased. And today, countries with the high income of the OECD have per capita income 52 times higher than those with low income. This is a challenge of huge dimensions for the United Nations. Only by stronger institutions and high-quality governance and based on legitimacy, only in this way can we manage the complex processes. We don't believe in utopia, but we do believe that it's possible to take gradual steps that make it possible to do away with the abysmal inequality that is a shame for the whole planet. This is an inequality that undermines rights and, in fact, it is a serious problem for the daily lives of many nations. Now, to to conclude on poverty and reduction of disequality, we should invest more in people. It's the most important component of the wealth of nations. And it should be noted that women represent 40% of those who are the least well paid compared to men throughout their lives. So to increase their economic well-being is essential. This is why Uruguay and all its trade agreements includes a chapter on trade and gender with an inclusive approach, as we have done in the recent agreements we've signed with Chile and with Canada. This is why it's important for states to design and implement social policies that are just and balanced, that strive to reduce inequalities, end poverty, and reduce existing divides in our country, providing to all a better future that is more just and encouraging. Many studies demonstrate the multidimensional aspect of poverty, which requires a holistic policy with sustainable solutions. Unless we have this multidimensional approach, there'll be 1 billion people in poverty by 2050. And of course, the lowest income countries that will have the highest demographic growth. This multidimensional approach must be envisioned by all states, because poverty is a problem that affects all societies in the world. This is why multilateral efforts are essential to eradicate poverty. Mr. President, secondly, the second major topic is the fight against climate change. For this, we need to be aware that the negative impact of climate change have a direct impact on increase in poverty and social and economic inequality around the world. By 2050, climate change could displace some 100 million persons only in sub-Saharan Africa, Southern Asia, and Latin America. The serious deterioration of the environment has achieved levels that are beyond what is tolerable. The commitment of all the member states of the United Nations is essential to put an end to the environmental damage and to try to reverse their consequences. The devastating fires that have struck California, Siberia, Bolivia, and Chile, together with those in the Amazon, in Brazil, put at serious risk biodiversity and the balance of the greatest ecosystem on the earth. Governments have an obligation to protect biodiversity as a common heritage and protect it for future generations. Uruguay reiterates its commitment to working with all countries towards protection and of the environment in conformity with the principles set out in the Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992 and with the commitments undertaken in the Paris Agreement in 2015, and would like to make a call to all governments to consider this threat very seriously. With this in mind, we'd like to reiterate our wholehearted support to the 25th Conference of Parties of the Framework Convention on Climate Change that will take place in Santiago de Chile in December, and we'd like to congratulate Costa Rica for having for its commitment to the environment and its efforts to accelerate climate action during the pre-COP that took place last October. In the face of this risk of climate change, Uruguay has adopted policies that put our country among the most progressive in especially our national energy policy, which achieved 98% of electricity generation from renewable sources. We states have a responsibility to unite our efforts to also focus on educational policies that make it possible to deepen the incorporation of climate change in all educational curricula and to contribute to raise awareness of our inhabitants on the challenges. Only in this way will we be better prepared to confront their negative impact and build societies that are more resilient, less vulnerable, with better ability to adapt to climate change and more aware and responsible in the face of this challenge. An active and conscientious citizenry, sufficiently educated and aware, will help in this task. Mr. President, the third major challenge is education. To provide a quality education, it's essential to be prepared for the use of technology and its democratization. The very rapid technological progress and progress in artificial intelligence is transforming societies, changing the way people learn, work, and live together. Educational systems could use artificial intelligence to change the way they're managed, the way so teaching and training. Each one of the goals of the 2030 Agenda requires education to provide all individuals with knowledge, skills, and values necessary that will allow them to live in a dignified way, build their own lives, and contribute to the societies in which they live. However, unfortunately, serious difficulties still remain. According to UNESCO, 262 million children and young people do not go to school, secondary school or primary school, and 750 million people are illiterate. All this, of course, only contributes to compounding poverty and marginalization. Assistance for education has been stagnant since 2010, and only 1/3 of these funds is allocated to primary and secondary education in low-income countries. In Uruguay, we are convinced that the key to confronting these challenges is by making education universal. Education is a human right. It is the invisible driver of sustainable development and peace. Thanks to our education, which is free, secular, and mandatory, Uruguay has 98.6% of its population literate, which is literate. 99% of children of the age of 5 are going to school, and 100% of teachers in primary public education are qualified. Uruguay has implemented public policies that have focused on reducing the digital divide. The introduction of the technology was an important component in achieving social inclusion and equality. Furthermore, projects well known such as universal access to internet, cattle breeding traceability, and others have led to Uruguay being acknowledged as a leader in this field. More recently, a new plan seeking to universalize the use of laptops and other technology for elderly people has also been launched. For these reasons, Uruguay has been recognized as one of the D9, the most digitally advanced countries, and in fact the summit of these countries will take place in Montevideo this coming November. However, countries like Uruguay still require cooperation that is rethought and reoriented in order to help us achieve the SDGs and overcome existing gaps and divides. As the president of Uruguay, Mr. Tabaré Vázquez, in this same assembly stated last year, we would like to reaffirm that the concept of development in transition is essential, and we will continue working on it in terms of income per capita, which is an indicator which doesn't always necessarily properly reflect the vulnerability of all the different groups in society. And this is important. Mr. President, change is in our hands. Putting human beings at the very heart of public policies. Only by doing this will we reduce inequalities, will we combat poverty and make this planet a better place every day, providing everyone, every single individual, a hope and a better future that is more just and with greater opportunities, without hunger, without poverty, without exclusion, and living in peace. Thank you very much.
I thank the Foreign Minister of Uruguay for his statement.